What's up, guys? I'm Sarah Weaver, and today is True Crime Tuesday. Now, what is True Crime Tuesday, you may ask? Well, let me tell you, okay, Steve? Okay, True Crime Tuesday is a day where I am going to be doing my makeup and telling you guys a true crime story. Now, this week we are going to be talking about none other than the Butcher Baker Killer, Robert Hansen. So, buckle your seatbelts. Steve, I see you with your seatbelt unbuckled, and I need you to buckle it right now because you're not ready for this, okay? You're not ready. All right, cue the cheesy intro music, please. So, I'm going to start out by telling you guys a little bit about Robert's past and how he grew up in his early life and everything like that, because I think it's very relevant to know how somebody grew up, and it kind of just shows you how it shaped who he becomes later on. Robert was born in Estherville, Iowa, and he was born in 1939. He was the son of a baker, and he would later go on to open his own bakery in the future and follow in his father's footsteps. Now, when Robert was a child, he didn't really get along with his parents. He kind of had a reputation at school for being the nerd, the kid who had acne, and, he was scrawny. He just didn't have the easiest time making friends, if that makes sense. He also was described as being kind of a loner and just really did not have the easiest time in school. He also had a stutter, which did not help him when it came to talking to girls and things like that, if you can only imagine. And the girls in his school, of course, would make fun of him and tease him for it, and it kind of led to him having a resentment toward women, and he just felt like he always wanted his revenge against them for making fun of him and not understanding him. He just felt lost. These things are no excuse for, turning into a sociopath or anything like that. And obviously, a lot of people that get bullied develop coping mechanisms or good at therapy and things like that help them overcome these things. But back then, we're talking the 40s and 50s, and those kids just didn't get a lot of help back then, and there wasn't much information to help them. So here we are. So it was said that since these kids made fun of him a lot, he decided to kind of pick up a hobby that would allow him to kind of do things on his own, and he didn't need to have friends or be on a sports team or anything like that. He could just do this by himself, and he became really good at it, and that was hunting. So he became really good at hunting and archery and things like that. He would later go on to be a drill instructor for the police academy in Pocahontas, Iowa. And that's when he met his first wife, who was described as a younger woman. So I don't know what that means or why that's relevant, but, get it, Robert, do your thing, okay? Okay, so not too long after Robert got married to this younger woman, he actually ended up committing one of his first crimes, which was burning down a school bus garage to his old school. So he was about, what would that be, 21 at the time, and he kind of felt like he just wanted his revenge against his school, I guess. After he burned the school bus down, he ended up going to prison for just a short time. But in this time, his wife, I guess, decided to leave him, and she just couldn't deal with him being a criminal. And, I get that, girl. I get that. It's understandable. You can leave him if you want to. And it seems like she kind of got out of that relationship at a good time, because after this, things kind of went downhill for Robert, and slowly you'll kind of see how this happens. So, another thing that happened while he was in prison was he was diagnosed by a psychiatrist as being schizophrenic and bipolar. Robert is kind of known at this point as just being this meek, mild man, and nobody would ever suspect that he had any mental problems or anything wrong with him. He just seemed so normal to everybody. So that was kind of a little bit about Robert's early life. And now we're going to kind of go on to more of his adult years, and kind of this is where things slowly go downhill for him. So here we are in the mid 1970s, and at this time, Robert decides that he's going to move to Anchorage, Alaska. During the mid 70s, this area was kind of booming. They had a transatlantic pipeline there, and it brought a lot of people in and kind of grew the city and grew the town. And it also brought a lot of misfits and kind of people who were escaping from their regular lives. And it also brought, just a lot of people who kind of felt lost and like they needed to just get out and get away. And what better place to do that than Anchorage, Alaska? You're in the middle of nowhere, and it's kind of like, at the time, I don't know how it is now, obviously, this was a while ago, but when I think of Alaska, I think of like Sarah Palin, killing a moose or something. I don't know. And I just picture like a lot of trees, a lot of forests, mountains, outdoorsy hunting areas, things like that. And people that just don't really want to be bothered, if you know what I mean. And along with these misfits that seemed to find their way to Anchorage, it brought a lot of people who were sex workers and drug dealers and criminals, just people who didn't want to be found. And they kind of formed this little community in Anchorage. And you would think that's kind of a weird spot for Robert to want to go, but I guess, he just wanted to get away from all the people he knew in his town and things like that. And I guess that makes sense to me. He didn't have any family ties there, and he just kind of felt like he wanted a new start. So during this time, since so many sex workers were drawn to this area, they also started going missing. But the thing was that people didn't really seem to care or notice. Their families, kind of wrote them off and just didn't really know if they would hear from them again once they moved there. So, they weren't really checking in on their family members and friends, because they just assumed they wanted to be left alone. They kind of chose this life and they just left them to it. So when people started going missing, these prostitutes and strippers, nobody really thought anything of it. And the police, didn't really put a high priority on women like that, which is unfortunate. And if you watch a lot of true crime shows and things like that, you'll see that this is a pattern with the police. They just don't really put as much priority into a low class, stripper, hooker, prostitute, whatever you want to call them. These sex workers start going missing, and on September 2nd in 1983, state troopers find the body of a woman in a gravel pit at a construction site. This kind of was the first body that they had found. These women had been going missing, but this is the first one that turned up dead. Her name was Paula Golding, and she was 17 years old. She was an exotic dancer, and she'd been missing for months. And she ended up being found near another exotic dancer whose name was Sherry Morrow. There were shell casings that were found near the bodies of both of these women, and they ended up matching a certain hunting rifle. Who's a hunter? I don't know. This leads into June of 1983, where sex worker Cindy Paulson comes into the picture. So one night while Cindy is working out on the streets, she is picked up by a man in a car. He asks her if he can get a blow job for $200. So, of course, Cindy is like, yes, please, give me the money. I don't know, like, what happened here, but $200 for that seems like a very high price. So that's kind of questionable to me, but here we are. So they're sitting in the car, and she gives him what he's asked for. And at this time, she's like, okay, just give me my money and I'll be on my way. Oh no, it's not that easy, Cindy. Unfortunately, Robert ends up grabbing her by the hair, and he's like, whoa, where are you going? You're not going anywhere. We're gonna go back to my place. And he handcuffs her, and he ends up taking her to his house. And she's also held at gunpoint, so there's really no way that she can get out of this. So next thing you know, they pull up to Robert's house, and the whole time that they're in the car, Cindy is kind of looking at the streets, trying to figure out what street she's on, where she's going. He doesn't blindfold her or anything, so she's able to describe what he looks like and where they're going and what his house looks like and everything. So really sloppy work on his part, if you ask me, but it ends up, obviously helping her in the end. So they get back to Robert's house, and he ends up tying her up in his basement, and he takes a chain and wraps it around her neck and ties her to this pole. And he's like, we're gonna have sex over there on that bearskin rug. And Cindy looks around and she's kind of like creeped out. There's a lot of hunting trophies on the walls, and they're all like heads of animals and wolves and, taxidermied things and whatnot. So she's like a little bit freaked out. I mean, I would say a lot of it. So Hansen has his way with her on the bearskin rug, and he's like, okay, I'm gonna take a nap, and then we're gonna go to my plane. So it turns out that Hansen has a private plane. He owns his own plane, and it's at this airport that's not too far away. What we'll later find out is that Hansen's MO is to take these women, usually prostitutes, and he'll take them to this kind of deserted location in the forest where nobody can really get to, and he'll take his plane up there. He'll take this woman and hunt her. Yeah, hunt her like a wild freaking animal in the woods. There's also a movie about this case, if you guys are curious or want to watch that. It's called The Frozen Ground, I believe. If that's not right, I'll put the right name up here. But they show these women, he releases them. I mean, obviously this is a movie's depiction of what they think happened, but they'll release them into the forest, and he hunts them down, like with a gun or a hunting knife or something like that, whatever he chooses. And it's just sick. It's sick. So here we are back at Hansen's house, and he wakes up from this nap, and he's like, okay, get up, we're getting in the car, and we're going to my plane right now. So he grabs Cindy, gets her in the car, and they go to the airport. So Cindy's in the back seat of his car, and she's kind of like making note of where they're going, where this airport is. And when he gets there, he has to take the time to unload his car and put things into his plane. So he's loading all of that into the plane, and Cindy's just sitting in the car, freaking out. She's like, I don't know what to do. How am I going to get out of here? And she eventually sees that he left one of the doors unlocked in the car, and he's not paying any attention. She can tell from where she's sitting, she can't see his head. I guess the top half of his body wasn't visible. So she was like, okay, this is my chance. While he's not looking, I'm gonna make a run for it. So she jumps out of the car and she runs and she runs and runs, and he sees her, of course. So he runs after her and he's chasing her down the street. Finally, a truck comes by, and the man in the truck sees her. She's half naked, running down the street. She didn't have shoes on or anything. She's still handcuffed. And the man ends up stopping, and he's like, get in the car, I'll help you. I'll take you to the police station, wherever you need me to take you. And she's like, no, like, don't get the police involved. Just take me to this hotel down the street. It turns out that her boyfriend, or her pimp, was staying at this hotel, and she knew that he would protect her and keep her safe, and so that's why he takes her to this hotel. But when he drops her off there, he's like, obviously I can't just go back to my normal day and ignore the fact that this happened. I have to tell the police. So he calls the police, and the police come, and they're like, okay, what happened here? What's going on? They're talking to Cindy, and Cindy's able to give them a full description of what Hansen looks like. And like I said, where he lived, what his house looked like, what his basement looked like. She can describe the pole that she was tied up to and just everything. So they're like, okay, let's go check out this guy. So they go and they talk to Hansen, and of course Hansen has an alibi. And they're like, this guy is so respected in the community. They know he has this bakery. I don't know if I even mentioned that, but he has a bakery in Anchorage, and it's very successful. It's also a place that a lot of the cops in the town go to for donuts and breakfast and coffee and just all those things. So the cops are very familiar with Hansen, and they're like, this guy, this is the guy you're talking about? Like, it can't be him. And he has an alibi. So, what do you do? So at this time, they can't find anything on Hansen. So they decide to bring in an FBI profiler who is going to kind of look at all these cases of the women that they've found so far, and including the description that Cindy Paulson has given them. And they're going to make a profile, based on all these things to kind of see if they can figure out the type of person that they're looking for, right? So they bring in this guy, John Douglas. John's profile ends up stating that the man they're looking for is probably a loner. He's probably somebody who has a stutter, maybe insecure about his looks, low self-esteem, that kind of thing. And his profile obviously ends up matching with Hansen pretty exactly. So at this point, they're able to get a warrant, and they search Hansen's home. So they're searching his house for any type of jewelry or memento or clothing item, anything, any pictures or something that would tie him to these women. And they end up going into his attic and finding jewelry from these women. Another thing they end up finding up there is a few of his hunting rifles, and one of them ends up matching the rifle that was used on these women that were found out in the forest by those construction workers. And then lastly, they end up looking in Hansen's headboard of his bed for some reason, and they find a map in there of the Alaskan bush, and they're able to see these little X's on the map. And they're like, what are these X's? You know, why are you hiding this map in your headboard? What a weird thing to do. So they question Hansen and they're like, what is this? You know, what is this map? What are these X's? He's not telling them. Hansen must have made up something, or he just didn't tell them what the real answer was. And they end up going out there to these locations and finding the bodies of a few more women that Hansen had hunted in the woods. And so they now know that these X's on the map were locations where he hid the bodies of these women after he killed them. I kind of wanted to read to you guys this little excerpt of a quote that one of the detectives had about this part of the case. And it has to do with when they are interrogating Hansen. And, you know, Hansen's still at this time trying to play it off like he's just some mild man who would never hurt a fly. He just doesn't want to give off that impression, obviously, that he could ever commit these crimes they're accusing him of. So this is the quote that Detective Rothschild gives talking about this interrogation with Hansen. So he says, as I sat there watching Hansen, there was a transformation that took place that was just amazing. His face got really red, and literally the hair on the back of his neck stood up. And that was when he changed to my eye. From Bob the baker to Bob the serial killer. And all of a sudden, I'm looking at this guy thinking, there's the guy who killed all those people. Creepy. Another thing about Hansen, too, that I kind of left out, but he was married and had 2 kids at this time. So once he moved to Anchorage and kind of got his business going and everything, he had these children and this whole family, and he was able to get away with all of this stuff, which is kind of similar to like a Ted Bundy or somebody like that who, you know, these men, these serial killers have families and children sometimes, and their families, they just never would guess that their dad is doing these things. And I read too that a lot of the times when he would do these killings and things, he would either make up an excuse for why he was taking his plane wherever he was going, or he would send his family away on a vacation somewhere so he could do whatever he wanted. And that's actually what was happening when Cindy Paulson was at his house. Back to the interrogation, after they see Robert's mood change like this and he kind of flips out on everybody, he ends up confessing to 17 of these murders. He goes into a plea bargain in exchange for giving the locations of all these women's bodies. He would like to be imprisoned out of state to lessen the chances of anybody there in the prison knowing him or knowing the victims of his crimes or anything like that. So they say, okay, you know, we'll honor that. And the other thing that Hansen wants is to be out of the media. He doesn't want his acts publicized in the media, and they kind of go along with it. They're like, okay, you know what, you're going away. You're giving us all these women's bodies, locations, and they agree to it. So Hansen ends up being sentenced to a life in prison and 461 years on top of that for all of the crimes he's committed. So finally, it was said that Hansen ended up getting sick while he was in prison. So they had to transfer him to another location where he could be hospitalized, I guess, or whatever they call that when you're in prison and you're sick. I'm not sure 100%. So he was transferred and ended up dying of natural causes or whatever he was suffering from at that time. He ended up dying at the age of 75. So, after Hansen's death, the detective who was on the case actually ended up retiring, and he was like, I just can't, you know, go on with this career path after I've seen the things that he's done to these people. And I think there's just some things in life that you just aren't ready to see, and you should probably never see, to be honest. And so I know I have so much respect for these detectives and, you know, criminal investigators who have to see this stuff and see the gore and see, you know, just even what their families go through, what their friends go through, all of it. You know, it's just sick. It's very disturbing, and I could see how it would take a toll on a guy like him for sure. All right, guys, that concludes this week's True Crime Tuesday. If you have any questions about what I used in this video, everything will be listed down in the description box, so you can check that out. Also, if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. Please hit the subscribe button. I would love that, and I would love to hear from you guys in the comments as well. So if you have any suggestions for stories you want me to do or makeup looks or anything, just leave it all down there. Or if you just want to say hi and chat it up, you know, I'll be down there and I would love to hear back. So without further ado, I hope you have a good week and I'll see you next time.